Hello and welcome to a new episode of Majlis and Markets. I am your host Hassan. In this podcast, we aim to bring you thought-provoking conversations with influential leaders in Islamic and global markets. In our final episode for 2023, we're moving back to the Arab world and heading to Iraq. 2 decades of conflict, which include the 2003 US-led invasion, intersectarian strife, and a war against so-called Islamic State have weighed heavily on the country. Adding to this, a volatile political scene, an oil-reliant economy, crumbling infrastructure, endemic corruption, and a bloated public sector have dampened the investment climate. Yet despite all of these challenges, Iraq's startup scene is something of a bright spot for the private sector and is set to grow in the coming years. The year 2022 was the biggest year for funding in Iraq's startup ecosystem, as over $18 million was deployed last year, according to Magnet, a Dubai-based data platform on MENA startups. Unlike Saudi Arabia, the UAE, or Egypt, Iraq does not have a thriving startup ecosystem and largely goes unnoticed by most regional or international venture capital investors. However, an increase in new startups, an improving political and security environment, as well as an improving economy are likely to change this. This, coupled with factors including a population of more than 40 million, with 93% under the age of 54 and 50% having access to the internet, suggests there are plenty of opportunities for startup entrepreneurs. My guest today is a well-known figure in Iraq's tech ecosystem. Mohammed Khoudary is the managing partner of Khoudary Group, a family holding company operating businesses in the US, Europe, and the Middle East. He is also the general partner of Iraq Venture Partners, a Baghdad-based early-stage venture capital firm. Mohammed is also the co-founder of Iraq Tech Ventures, an early-stage investment firm and the driving force behind Tech Hub, a collaborative space for startups. During our conversation, I spoke to Mohammed about the opportunities of Iraq's emerging tech ecosystem, as well as the more specific challenges facing entrepreneurs and investors. We also touched on more broader topics, including Iraq's currency volatility and the country's oil reliance. Could you maybe give us a little bit of a background about yourself and what you do at Iraq Venture Partners before we get into the more nitty-gritty of the conversation?
Sure. My accent can be a little deceiving, but I am a native of Baghdad, born there. I was raised in the U.S. where I studied, did most of my studies there, as well as my university degree at the University of Texas. Had the opportunity to start Khoudary Group with my father and brother some 20 plus years ago, more focused on traditional business sectors in Iraq and now more broadly within the Middle East region and Europe, providing oil and gas services, engineering projects, government projects, and life support services. So we do quite a range of different businesses. We've got about 6 businesses that flow into the holdco of Khoudary Group. But a big part of my focus today is actually on the tech sector within Iraq. I'd say over 5 years ago, we started looking at investment opportunities. This is more than 5 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, as the country was, fighting with trying to, root out ISIS at low oil prices. The country was facing a lot of geopolitical and economic challenges. And one thought that came to mind is, as being based in Dubai and observing how the region has grown and developed, is, why not in Iraq? Well, why can Iraq not modernize and shift its economy from an oil-based economy into a human capital-focused economy? And that was the beginning of our journey as I started Iraq Tech Ventures with my wife, Laura Olivier, who helped me kind of create Iraq Tech Ventures, look at opportunities, and we had the opportunity some 6 years ago to invest in some of the first and only startups at the time. Miswag, which was and is the largest e-commerce company in Iraq, El Saria, which is a online food delivery, and a few others. But we were able to not just structure investment into those, but syndicate, kind of go to our friends within both Iraq, but even more broadly within Dubai and the UK, to invite them in to co-invest with us into these deals and help kind of catalyze the ecosystem, so to speak. Try to get some movement there. So it's been a long and fun journey in doing that. Certainly with a set of challenges, but I'm a believer that in the long term you're going to see a very different, more modernized Iraq as opposed to what you see today, which is really an oil-based economy. So that's just a little about myself and about kind of what we've done over the last 5-7 years.
Great, great. Mohammed, before we get into the more specifics of Iraq, the opportunities and challenges with regards to the ecosystem and the tech ecosystem and the venture capital, I mean, Iraq is becoming an increasing tech ecosystem, as I mentioned in the introduction. Although it may not be on the same level as, say, a more established one, say like within the Middle East region or Arab world, compared to, say, like the United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia, or Egypt, or even Jordan, which obviously has a smaller population than Iraq. I mean, Iraq is a country of about 43.5 million people. It's got like, I think it's the second biggest producer in OPEC. It's got all this oil wealth. It's got a lot of history, Mesopotamia, all of that. And it's got a very young population. Maybe, do you think like Iraq, what kind of why should people consider Iraq as a growing tech ecosystem?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like you said, the fundamentals are there. It's a second largest OPEC producer. It's got 40 plus million people. So the fundamentals to build a thriving economy, and as a subsect of that, a thriving tech ecosystem is there. There are a few things that are missing. I think the academic institutions need to catch up. I think the regulatory framework is still not there. And you have a country that's been fairly isolated, with the exception of maybe the last 2 decades. So it has not really been well connected with the rest of the world. So there's a lot of catch up that needs to happen. But that said, I think anybody that's looked at Iraq as a market or done business in Iraq understands the vast potential of Iraq. You can't talk about the potential without talking about the challenges and the pitfalls as well. So I'm always I'm a realist, and I don't mean to paint Iraq in this rosy come in and everything you touch turn to gold. That's not true. A lot of challenges in Iraq, but if you know how to if you have patience, you have a long-term investment horizon, I think there's a lot of good opportunities there. So as you said, young population, growing demographic, and frankly, it's been isolated. So you don't have the same penetration of international companies, regional tech companies. As of recent, you've had nobody there. But you've had a few companies, Talabat, Kareem, a few others entering in recent years. But overall, I think we feel very bullish on the long-term potential of Iraq. Now, is that 5 years? Is that 10 years? That's a good question. I don't know. The ecosystem has developed at a slightly slower pace than I would have liked. Now, there's been a global economic slowdown and recession in the tech sector. We've also had COVID for 2 years. So it's not, there have been a lot of factors outside of our control of the Iraq ecosystem and economy. But that said, we'd like to see more movement. And I feel like we're kind of at a nexus now where you're seeing real international companies taking a hard look or coming in to Iraq in terms of looking at it from an investment angle. So it's not a perfect market, but if it was, it'd be oversaturated, and but there's still tremendous potential and upside, and I think we're trying to find those right opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I was in my research for this episode, I came across some research by one of these insight companies, and they mentioned Iraq has one of the fastest growing smartphone penetration levels in the world. And obviously Iraq is I think as we mentioned, has a very youthful population, very tech savvy, very well integrated into social media. So yeah, I think there's definitely opportunities, and I think as you mentioned, like with the likes of Talabat or Karim entering Iraq. I think that solidifies more confidence, with these big regional heavyweight companies coming in. And I think it kind of sets the tone for other companies. Mohammed, when we talk about Iraq in terms of with regards to the tech ecosystem, what kind of opportunities, like when we talk about opportunities, like what sectors do you think provide the biggest opportunities for not just entrepreneurs, but for also investors or users of these emerging startups?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we look at it, and let me take a step back and explain. I think we spoke briefly about Iraq Tech Ventures. Iraq Tech Ventures was kind of the predecessor to what is now Iraq Venture Partners. Iraq Venture Partners is a investment venture capital fund, and currently something what we've launched with two partners, Omar Handel from the Handel Group and Bassam Falah from Innovest. We've been able to join hands with them as Iraq Tech Ventures and create Iraq Venture Partners, and it's one of the first true venture capital firms focused on Iraqi startups in the Iraqi ecosystem. So we're very proud of that, and I'm very grateful to have two very visionary partners that have really done a lot in the space in terms of what the Handel Group has done with the station, in terms of what Bassam and Innovest have done with Ruwad al-Araq. So not only have we joined forces, but we're all doing our own projects and our own initiatives. This is one where we've all joined forces to really create some synergies between our groups and grow this with the hopes in the next few years of creating Iraq's first major institutional investment fund. So that said, going back to your question in terms of what we're doing, what the industries, every industry needs to be modernized and disrupted in Iraq. How that's going to look and how that's going to evolve. The initial industry that's the most obvious is the consumer-facing industry, retail, e-commerce. There's a lot more happening on that space. There's a lot of spending. Iraqis like to spend their money. And so there's a lot happening in terms of a lot of e-commerce companies. You have obviously food delivery, ride hailing. The way that I view this, the growth of the tech industry in Iraq is, I think what we're witnessing right now is a lot of, and no disrespect, but it's copycat models. It's got models that are proven out in other more developed societies. So, a food delivery on demand, an e-commerce similar to an Amazon, and that's going to be kind of the first wave of entrepreneurs and companies. The second, I think you'll see a lot more Iraq-focused solutions. So if there's issues with, there's issues with the power sector there's issues with security. So you'll find, technology solutions, whatever those might be, to address the specific needs of not only Iraqis, but hyper-local, somebody within a certain area, addressing, how do they tie in power and measure it so that you've got on your phone your consumption and who owes what on the shared generator grid of that community. Something like that. And then obviously the fintech will follow as well. Fintech's a major challenge. Banking and finance in Iraq is a major challenge. And we've been hoping that fintech solutions kind of help leapfrog Iraq. It's still slow going. There have been a lot of solutions. There have been, Zain Cash and KeyCard and Asia Hawala. There's a few options out there, but the adoption's still not where it needs to be. And then the third kind of phase of what I think is going to be Iraq's evolution on the tech sector is exporting of Iraqi tech companies into the region and internationally. So that, I see that as, year zero is right now the copycat. Year 5 is more customized, bespoke solutions to the Iraqi market. Year 10 would be them starting to export their knowledge and entrepreneurs abroad.
And I think what's interesting is that you mentioned the different industries that these startups can serve. Obviously, do you think they complement the incumbents? So, like you mentioned, banking and finance a little bit. So obviously Iraq has has I would say, an underdeveloped banking sector compared to, say, some of the neighboring countries. Do you think, like, some of these other new entrants to the market can, shake up the incumbents that are offering services? Because I know digitalization is a big thing in Iraq at the moment, right?
Absolutely. I think they can and they will. I think what needs to happen though is you need some government support and regulatory support on that front as well. So, they can't work in a vacuum because you do need the government to support and create a regulatory environment, a framework that keeps up with this ongoing development on the fintech side. So while we're getting there, we need a little bit of government push to support and allow for these companies to grow and develop. So yes, I think they're working hand in hand with the banking sector to help it grow and evolve. A lot of them may eventually be acquired by a lot of these banks and plugged into their current system. So it's still early days to see how that shakes out, but it's good to see that a lot of people, a lot of smart people, hardworking people are working on these solutions.
Very good. Yeah, yeah. And what are your expectations for like the growth in terms of startups going forward? I think you mentioned obviously like globally there's been a downturn in deal making with venture
Yeah.
capital. Do you think like the next 5, 10 years will be, or even like even if we take it even to like the next 2, 3 years, obviously it's not a long time period, but do you think like there'll be more startups coming in the next few years?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's already coming. Just I was just looking at several deals we've got within Iraq Venture Partners. We've got maybe 10 to 15 deals we're looking at, we review and then obviously present it to our investment board, who takes a decision. Our structure within our Iraq Venture Partners is, we have a catalyst fund that is comprised of 7 members, and we take a kind of democratic approach to that. We all look at the opportunity and take a vote on whether we're proceeding with the investment or not. So it's a bit of a hybrid model between a venture kind of model versus an angel model. So we take a bit of a hybrid approach on how we approach those. So yes, there are deals. And now I got to be honest with you, Hassan. I think the deal flow in Iraq will improve. I think there's a bit of a gap. There's some deals that are quite established, really experienced founding team that have a lot of experience, the likes of in recent years, like Lemona. You also have Belly, really experienced founding team with a lot of financial backing. But then you've got a lot of the, startups that don't have those types of resources. So I'd like to see that gap close a little bit, and I think we're starting to see better deal flow. You've got a lot of organizations in Iraq that are supporting 5-1 Labs, the station. Capita does a really good job of supporting a lot of these entrepreneurs. So you've got a lot of organizations there that are trying to help these founders, these entrepreneurs get their businesses up to speed and become investment ready. And that's all actually a program that we are looking to take on as well with IFC, working on an investment readiness program called Scale Iraq. So there are people affecting change in Iraq, but it's just it's going to take some time to really see the deal flow look like the deal flow you see in Europe, the US, or even here in Dubai.
Yeah, very good, very good. And a lot of this activity with regards to the entrepreneurs, where is it taking place? Is it taking place in Baghdad, or is it taking place in the KRG, or is it taking place in other areas of Iraq, or is it across the board?
Surprisingly everywhere, Hassan. I mean, it's really you'd be surprised that there's quite a few startups. Obviously, I'd say the vast majority are Baghdad and Erbil, but you've got quite a few entrepreneurs in Basra, Mosul. They're coming. There's a real desire for these entrepreneurs to break through their regional areas and kind of come in and become a national player. So yes, Baghdad and Erbil are the vast majority, but we're seeing them come from everywhere, which is very a positive sign that it's not just Baghdad or Erbil and everywhere else. So we've looked at deals from all over Iraq, frankly.
Very good. Yeah, yeah. And with regards to the local investors, obviously yourselves and some of the others, um, do you think that there needs to be more involvement of, say, regional VC investors or funds? And I know maybe the international ones may be a bit risk hesitant, but like say some of the more regional ones from say like Saudi or the
Yeah.
UAE, what will prompt them to come to Iraq, do you think?
Yes, I'd love to see that. Obviously, it's a business decision for them. It's also, a matter of where to allocate resources. Are there, there's obviously other markets for them to look at. Like we talked about at the outset, I mean, the fundamentals of Iraq are not changing. So the reality is, there. I think it's a matter of time before they start investing. Now, you do have a few that have already invested into Iraq. MEVP invested in Toters. Obviously, Toters is a Lebanese food on demand food delivery company, but it's good to see that they've kind of invested in their launch into Iraq. And you've got quite a few other VCs, regional VCs looking at Iraq. They're dipping their toes, but
Yeah.
they're still a little hesitant. Again, I don't blame them. It's not an easy market, but I think it's a matter of time until Iraq cannot be ignored, and they're gonna make some investments into Iraq. And why? Again, just the upside growth. I mean, there's few markets that have the fundamentals and the market size of Iraq. So I think they will. I think what we're trying to do at IVP is kind of pave that way and create a bit of a model and a thesis that says Iraq is investment worthy. There's a way to do it. There's a way to do it correctly that protects you from as an investor. And we would like to share that with regional VCs, family offices that have interest. We'd be more than our doors are open. We'd love to show that. The thing with the tech ecosystem, and specifically on the investment side, is it's not zero sum. I think it actually, as more investors come in and have success, everybody benefits. So even if you're investing in a startup that's a competitor to one of our portfolio companies, that success brings in more investors, more eyes into Iraq. So a rising tide lifts all boats, so to speak. So we want to see more investors, more attention to Iraq, is that's going to be better for the ecosystem at large.
Yeah, and I think obviously with the growing economic and trade relations, I think only really over the last 5 years has, like, say, Saudi Arabia increased its bilateral trade or economic relations with Iraq, and same with the UAE and some of the other Gulf countries. But obviously, Iraq is a very complicated country to an outsider like myself or other people when they look at it. And obviously, Iraq's been through, over the past 20 years, it's been through a very difficult period, not just with the American invasion, but then all the other conflicts. And then on top of that, you've got the domestic challenges, youth unemployment, all these things, over reliance on oil. What would you say are some of the challenges for startups and entrepreneurs? The difference between, I remember when I was speaking to an entrepreneur from Iraq, and she mentioned, the differences in doing business in, say, the KRG and federal Iraq. Is there like a challenge there for entrepreneurs, or is it a standardized system across the board?
No, I mean, definitely fairly different systems between the Kurdistan regional government and the federal government in Iraq. I think that's one challenge. Sometimes also the demographics and consumer behavior is different between those markets as well. So it's not just the registration process and tax filing, which can be different, but also sometimes consumer behaviors. It makes it very challenging, between this. One of the main challenges for entrepreneurs in Iraq, just outside of the funding, which is a major challenge for them, is operationally Iraq's a very difficult market. You go from province to province, from Kurdistan to federal Iraq, things operate very differently, and things are not streamlined. Things are it's not very digitized. So getting simple things done like registration or a tax clearance or whatever you might need to or even just operating through checkpoints in Baghdad, or it's very difficult operationally. So this is one of the things that are starting to improve. You see it. I mean, each time uh, I'm in Baghdad, I see a significant improvement in terms of the quality of life and just operations, but it's still a very difficult market. So I really have to applaud a lot of these entrepreneurs that having a startup is difficult enough. Having a startup with very little to no external funding is difficult enough. But having a startup in Iraq operating with all of the geopolitical, security, political challenges, regulatory challenges is very, very challenging. And I've got to applaud a lot of them that are doing it day on day, and a lot of them doing a very good job.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like you said, it's a very big challenge just to have a startup in any geography or any environment, and obviously with the global downturn, with the economy and the squeeze in liquidity for funding, especially at
Yeah.
the early stage, I can imagine is a tough challenge. Like when we look at other more developed ecosystems in the Middle East, like if we look at Dubai, for example, or if we look in Bahrain, um, obviously there's been a lot of efforts by the government to promote a startup ecosystem. Um, and there's a lot of talent in places like Dubai. Like they make it very easy to seek and source talent. Would you say that that's a challenge for Iraq, and is that linked to more of the education system there?
Yeah, I think there's talent in Iraq. I think there are a lot of talented, you know, in young men and women ready to start a business. I think can the universities do a better job of instilling uh, more entrepreneurship skills? Yes, I do think there is room for growth there. But I think the main challenge, honestly, is the environment, whether that be regulatory, operationally, as we discussed. I think there's a lot of very resilient, high achieving uh, young men and women that are ready to start their businesses. So, uh, and I think within the last, I mean, 20 years, but really more so in the last 10 years, I think a lot of these entrepreneurs or founders or potential founders have been more globally exposed. A lot of them have spent time in the US, Silicon Valley, in
Mm.
London, over here in Dubai. So I think there's been a good job of kind of a, global immersion, if you will. And a lot of the programs I was talking about earlier, again, 5-1 and the station, Capita, and the like have done a really good job of taking, inviting some of these entrepreneurs abroad to see, what other entrepreneurs are doing, what best practices are. So I don't think there's a talent shortage. Frankly, I think there needs to be some structural improvements to allow for let's say startup free zones,
Yeah.
easier registration, just making things a little easier where possible.
Yeah, so it's like with other Arab countries. I think a lot of people after university they join the public sector. And
Mhm.
obviously, the Iraqi government and not just this Iraqi government, but previous Iraqi governments have tried to, diversify the economy and spur the private sector. And obviously, I think the startups can help. With regards to the startups, one thing I wanted to ask you, and I was in my research, I discovered or I learned that there isn't, although Iraq has a lot of female participation in the workforce in startups, is it the same thing? Is there a lot of female startup founders?
There are, not as many as I'd like to see. Obviously, you could always improve those numbers in terms of female founders and entrepreneurs. I mean, um, there's, but but there are some, and there's we I think there's one founder of Kesk. Uh,
Yeah, yeah, she's very good.
Asima, she's a very
Yeah.
impressive. She's done a great job. And I think they've got a kind of green tech solution.
Mm.
So there are a few, but no, I think we could do a better job of having a more female representation within the Iraq tech sector.
Yeah, and then Another challenge I think faces Iraq, and in my previous conversations with startup founders from Iraq was hard infrastructure. So I think you alluded to this in your previous answers. Was things like the roads and electricity supply, or consistent electricity supply, and other things. I mean, Iraq faces some climate risks. Do you think that the improvement in hard infrastructure could help the startup ecosystem?
Absolutely. I mean, things we take for granted outside of Iraq, power is not assured for startups in Iraq. So let's say you're a SaaS business and you're hosting, you've got your servers. You need backup power, and to support that, and that's a major cost to a lot of these startups. So instead of investing in customer acquisition or building their team, they're investing in backup generators and power solutions to keep them online. So you can understand these are the type of operational challenges that they're facing that are kind of unique to the Iraq ecosystem. So they find a way. They do a good job, but again, this is where I think some support, whether private sector or probably more so government, in creating kind of maybe some free zones with the back end services, support the hard infrastructure would be very helpful to a lot of these companies.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. And another, and probably more towards what you were talking about earlier as well, is the financing. Obviously, for a lot of startups, seed, pre-seed, seed is a challenge in any market. But in Iraq, what are the key funding challenges for startups, whether they're in early stage or seed or and even in scale up? I think I can imagine a lot of scale ups, even though they've received funding and they've had some traction, do they have challenges in raising further funding?
Yeah, I think the early funding where you're getting those lower tickets, whether it be let's say 100 to $500,000 kind of initial seed round, uh, those are quite doable. What happens is as you emerge past the Series A or beyond, the ticket sizes has to go up from 500,000 to 5 million at times, right? So that's where there's a big gap in the market, and that's where I think regional institutions and regional VCs could really step in and play a big role there, because I think that's where their tickets really come in handy.
How much do you think a banking reform is needed in order to support the ecosystem? I mean, I was reading an article about how I think it was Iraq Islamic Bank was setting up a fund to help startups. Do you think that the incumbent banks need to do more to support the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think the banks certainly could help, and there's a lot that can be done with the banking system. There's a lot of programs that are government backed or insured, and it gives the banks some lines of credit to be able to go out and provide either debt or equity into startups. That said, you know the the banks aren't the traditional avenues of money here. It's the sovereign wealth fund. Ideally, Iraq's new investment company that's being created could help seed some investment capital into these companies through local venture capital funds like IVP or others.
Yeah.
So while I think the banking sector can help in a lot of ways, I would say more so for payment processing, for digitization, some fintech solutions to help move the economy. But I don't expect the Iraqi banks to be the ones who are doing these investments. It could be a short-term solution to help move some things along, but eventually you need venture-focused institutions with the ability to write large-scale tickets, whether that be Iraqi institutions or regional institutions. So I think the banks can help facilitate to a certain extent, but I don't think the banks should turn into venture capital funds. I don't think that's who they are.
Yeah. Are you saying you would like to see something similar to like Saudi Arabia, where they have the Public Investment Fund or these other, or like I said,
Channel through the local focused VC funds or investment funds. That's what I think. So rather than the banks doing it, the banks aren't well structured to do. They don't move at the same pace or risk appetite as a VC
Sure.
would, right?
Yeah. You know, it's
So it's just not in their nature. So I think fund the VCs or the investment managers to allow them to do the due diligence, the investment structuring, and let the banks be banks.
sure. Yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I think it has to start organically, right? And I guess the banks can play a role in supporting that, but they shouldn't be like the primary
Yeah.
financiers of these things. With regards to the broader economic challenges Iraq is facing, obviously, you know, the business environment in Iraq is still challenging, irrespective if it's a startup or a large-scale company or even a mid-sized company. What do you think the main challenges are facing Iraq at the moment or going into 2024? I mean, I was reading an article about how the Central Bank of Iraq recently said that all local transactions from January 1st next year will be in Iraqi dinars, and that there's this like drive in some countries for de-dollarization. What are your thoughts of that? And also the over-reliance on things like oil. Do you think these are like risks to startups in Iraq?
Yeah, tremendous risks. I mean, I think the oil risk, let me start with that, is a broader risk to Iraq at large. So while it's great to have a tremendous amount of oil reserves and production, I think we need to realize that there's a finite period by which oil will be needed and relevant. Now that again, that could be 20 years, it could be 50 years, but over a certain period of time, Iraq needs to take this opportunity, whether it's 20 years or however long that might be, to diversify and modernize its economy. It needs to take that oil revenue and properly invest it in its infrastructure, its people to build a global modern economy.
Mm,
So that risk on the oil front isn't just to the tech startups; it's to Iraq at large.
mm.
In terms of the IQD, moving away from the dollar, yeah, I mean that's just a challenge for everybody. I mean, going from a dollar, denominated economy for 20 years, dollar marked economy, I should say, but a lot of transactions and many were in dollars,
Mm.
and changing that in a matter of 3 months is extremely difficult. So, how do companies with limited resources, let's say they're buying goods from abroad? We have one company called Ordery that buys goods from abroad and fulfills it and provides it to local customers. And they bring it in and they pay customs and tariffs and do all that and provide it to the end user. So it's very difficult when you're charging in Iraqi dinar, but you're buying in dollars, and there's a big gap between the market rate and the CBI auction rate.
Mm.
It's about 20%. So all of these are major challenges that take a lot of thought and a lot of effort and time to try to work around those things. So yeah, I mean, I don't have my own organization, we're suffering for that. And unfortunately also the everyday Iraqi individual is also suffering because their Iraqi dinar is going, it's not going as
It's
far.
losing
So
value every day.
they're losing 10 to 20% of their salary. So we're having to kind of bump up salaries within my organization to try to compensate for the loss of value in the dinar there. So it's been a challenge for not just startups but for everybody. And I hope they find a way to stabilize the currency. Without a stable currency, political system, banking system, it's very hard to get anything, to move things forward in a meaningful way.
Yeah, and I guess in some countries, I don't know if you've seen this, but like the UAE, and when they deal with India, for example, with oil trade, they settle in their local currency. So I think maybe Iraq is thinking along these lines, but it goes back to I think what you just said. The Iraqi dinar has, you know, over the last say 20 years hasn't had a good performance, and it's losing value. And I think that the government last year did a devaluation of the
Yeah.
Iraqi dinar, and obviously that had an adverse impact on average Iraqis for their daily living and things. And obviously with the US dollar, I mean, there was a article I think I was reading in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, one of these mainstream newspapers, and they mentioned about how some of the Iraqi banks are having challenges with their dollar access. So I can imagine like again, access to finance is very, very difficult, not just for startups, but for Iraqis in general. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, very, very fair characterization. Yeah, it's quite a challenge, with the volatility there. So I'm hoping they kind of get a clear policy on this and provide ample time for companies to be prepared to make those changes. So yeah, hoping to see some stability on the currency volatility.
Yeah. And then obviously, Mohammed, when we're talking about Iraq, we're talking Iraq has had a lot of political and security challenges. I mean, what do you think of the current well, I call it political stability, but for Iraqi standards, it's quite stable. It has
Yeah.
been quite stable compared to, say, the last, say, 4 or 5 years. Do you think like obviously there's an election coming up, I think, later this month in Iraq, and then sits at the crossroads between, say, Saudi and some of the other geopolitical challenges in the region. How does Iraq navigate this in order to help its ecosystem, the startup ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, I think a few things. I think fairly, the strong price of oil provides some economic stability to Iraq in terms of government revenue. I think the current government has done a good job of navigating a lot of their, political relationships with uh, all of their surrounding neighbors. Iraq's positioned in a very unique and sometimes challenging area around quite a bit of conflict around it. And I think that the current leadership in Iraq, and I think we got to give credit to Prime Minister Soudani and his
Mm,
cabinet trying in really being able to navigate. But I think what you're seeing is, you know, I think you're seeing Iraq starting to really step into a more mature regional role as a player, as a facilitator, as somebody to really, not just be, you know, told what to do, but really giving input and it's one of the largest, uh, obviously economies, but also a strong democracy that has various representation. Now, there's a lot of challenges, and I'm not saying it's perfect by any means, but I'm glad to see peaceful transfer of power on several occasions. Despite all the challenges, you see the government and the system starting to work. Now, are there reforms needed? Are there changes needed? Absolutely. But I'm glad to see that Iraq's starting to take a real presence on the regional and even international stage. So if if we can continue, I always got to be a little careful because whenever we're enjoying some political stability relative, as you said, Hassan, something comes out of nowhere and we don't know what's going to happen. But I've been quite pleased at that, and I think you need that in order to grow and create foreign direct investment, people coming in and
mm.
having the confidence to really, and that's outside of just the tech and startup ecosystem. That's at large multi-billion-dollar projects, plants, real estate developments. Iraqis are very capable, and they're going to do what they can. But the reality is, in 2023, we're in a global economy, and we need foreign companies, foreign governments to come in and invest in Iraq as well.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's a very difficult environment to be in, and yeah, with the political stability or the recent political stability in Iraq's definitely helped its ecosystem. Mohammed, as we draw the podcast to a close, you mentioned a few times about reforms going into 2024 and beyond. What reforms are needed the most, like the most urgent reforms to help the startups ecosystem or the startup ecosystem in Iraq, not just for entrepreneurs but also for investors and users?
Yeah, I think let me. I think the number one thing that the government can do is allow 100% foreign ownership into entities in Iraq. I know that's meant to serve as a kind of a protectionism for local Iraqi and local Iraqi companies, but the reality for us is at the end of that growth curve for these startups, there needs to be an exit, right? And the reality is most of these exits are large acquisitions by large tech companies, then private equity firm, whoever that might be, and those entities want to take a controlling interest when they're spending $100 million. They want a controlling interest. They don't want to have a passive interest. So the number one thing, Hassan, that can be done in the short term is to change that law that was introduced, I think, in 2019
Mm.
to allow for 100% foreign ownership into these entities, so that as we grow this, so we see the likes of these large regional international tech companies acquire these local companies, and that's good for the ecosystem. That shows that there is a market and that there's an interest. Without that, it becomes a lot more challenging.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. And Mohammed, what are your plans for 2024? Do you have any other than the things that you mentioned? Do you have any other initiatives or projects coming up in 2024?
Um, no, we've got we've got the programs that we're doing under Iraq Venture Partners. That's the Scale Iraq, and we're the CARP program with the World Bank. We're hoping to take those two on. Those are some things we've been discussing with the World Bank and IFC for some time, and hopefully it takes shape and we were able to move forward with those programs. And that's supporting local entrepreneurs, investment readiness into those companies, taking those companies abroad and exposing them to regional and international investors and players. So that's one thing that we're looking to do. Also, just within IVP, I think along with my partners, Bassam and Amber, we're looking to continue building our portfolio, proving out the thesis that Iraq is investment worthy, and looking at probably look at somewhere near 50 or so opportunities, maybe looking at an investment in 5 or 10 of those. So just continuing growing, developing, helping the ecosystem. This isn't something that's going to change overnight. I think it takes a sustained, consistent focus by all players within the ecosystem. So I hope we just get closer to our goal, which is eventual institutional fund of say $40-50 million that we can deploy and really become the first major institutional investor in Iraq.
Great, great. And Mohammed, how can people get in touch with you with their ideas or thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. Visit us at Iraq Ventures venturepartners.com. There's a contact us. Happy to leave my email, Mohammed@kadarigroup.com. But would be happy to hear from any of any interested investors, any interested entrepreneurs, or anybody just wanting to learn a little bit more about the ecosystem. Again, the more we can educate, put Iraq tech ecosystem on the map, the better it is for the ecosystem at large. So we'll be more than happy to have a discussion at any time.
Mohammed Khodari, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Hassan. Appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.